Next up, we have Arnie Alpert from Canterbury, New Hampshire. He is co-director of the American Friends Service Committee's New Hampshire program. He is co-host of State House Watch, a radio show on WNHN-LP in Concord, and also a member of the Board of New Hampshire Coalition to abolish the death penalty. Now, just last Thursday, as you may be aware, by a single vote, the New Hampshire House overrode the governor's veto of the death penalty repeal bill. The Senate will now vote on Thursday, so this is really happening. And Arnie is going to tell us all about that, along with how his own perspective was formed and what he has learned over the course of this decades-long campaign to end the death penalty in New Hampshire. In his story, Bending Toward Justice. Come on up, Arnie.
That's gonna not do it. So anyway, so if you're telling a fairy tale, it's easy to start with, all right, and then it probably ends with, they live happily ever after. If you're telling a true tale, it's a little harder to figure out where it starts, especially when they tell you that you've only got 10 minutes. All right, so I'm going to start this story, or I think the story starts in 1985, when I was with a group of Quakers. Now, do people know anything about Quakers? If you know anything about Quakers, you probably know that Quakers are against killing, right? All right, so when there was a proposal made to change the state's official method of execution from death by hanging to death by lethal injection, the Quakers got together and they said, this is the wrong discussion to be having. We shouldn't be talking about how to kill people. We should be talking about not killing people. So the Quakers wrote a letter, which they call a minute, and I went with Marion Baker, a member of the Ware Friends meeting and who was the clerk of the All New Hampshire Friends gathering, and we went and delivered it at a public hearing at the State House and basically said, instead of discussing this, you should talk about ending the death penalty. So I continued to follow the issue over the next decade or so, as, you know, once in a while there would be bills that would affect the issue, but it really wasn't until 1997. And wait, maybe that's when the story starts. Because in 1997, in the late summer and early fall, there was a series of 3 different murders, or multiple murders, that took place that got the state's attention. One of them was the rape and murder of an 8-year-old girl. One of them was the murder of a police officer, and another one was a guy who went on a killing spree, and by the time it was over, he was dead, but also dead were 2 state police officers, a judge, and a journalist. And with all of this going on, the state's political leaders, who sometimes operate by some type of reflex action, decided that the proper response to this was to expand the use of the death penalty. And this was headed by our Democratic Governor, Jeanne Shaheen, working in league with the Republican heads of the New Hampshire House and Senate. And they drafted legislation to expand the death penalty. Now, I was part of a group that then was formed initially under the leadership of the New Hampshire Council of Churches to try to stop this bill from going through. And when it came up for a vote in the House of Representatives on March 12th, 1998, an interesting thing happened, because 2 young representatives decided that instead of simply using this as an opportunity to speak out against expansion of the death penalty, they were going to seize the opportunity and say, this is the time to get rid of it altogether. And I was sitting in the House gallery watching it. And I was watching when Representative Clifton Below, the son of a preacher, from Lebanon, New Hampshire, got up and told the story of a fellow named John Newton, who some of you might have heard of. He was the captain of a slave ship. He, by his own admission, was responsible for the violent deaths of dozens of people and was responsible for the captivity and enslavement of God knows how many others. A criminal by any account, and certainly by our standards now. But John Newton went through a conversion. He changed his mind. He changed his direction. He became a leader in the movement against the slave trade, and he became a writer of hymns. And he wrote the hymn, Amazing Grace, how sweet that sound that saved a wretch like me. And that if he could be changed even after doing these horrible acts, then so could anybody. And who are we as people or as a state to take away that opportunity from them? Now, after Representative Below, up stood Representative Rennie Cushing. And in the gallery with me was Rennie's wife and their infant daughter, Grace. And Rennie got up and told the story of how 10 years earlier, a neighbor came knocking on the door of his parents' house on Winnicott Road in Hampton, and when his father answered the door, the neighbor pulled out a shotgun, and as Rennie says, turned his chest into hamburger, and he died immediately. And Rennie told the story that taking away the life of this person who had taken away the life of his father was not going to do anything for him and his family. It was simply going to fill another coffin and leave another family bereft and missing their family member. And that there were other things that were needed by people, including his daughter, Amazing Grace. Now, what this did was it turned the debate on its head. Because prior to that moment, if you think about it, most people in that room of legislators would have been under the impression that if you had lost your father or any of your loved ones to a violent homicide like that you would want to get the person who did it. And for Rennie to get up and say that there was another way to look at it turned the discussion around. And the amendment to abolish the death penalty didn't go through, but the amendment to expand the death penalty was defeated by a very wide margin and went away. Now, for me, it did something else also, because I started to think about my own story. Because when I was 11 years old, on what would have been the first day of school after the New Year's Christmas break, my father came into my room before I was fully awake and sat on the edge of my bed and told me that during that night, a burglar had broken into my grandfather's hardware store, and my grandfather surprised him, and the burglar grabbed a claw hammer and hit him over the head and killed him. And I was 11 years old, so as I think about it now, looking back on that, what happened over the next few days or the next week or weeks is a bit of a blur. But these are the things that I remember. I remember everybody in the Jewish tradition, there's a period they call Shiva, which for a period of 7 days, people gather in the homes of the bereaved family. So I remember people coming to my grandmother's house and bringing blintzes and knishes and kugels, but also people talking about my grandfather and what a wonderful person he was and what he meant to the community, which I certainly understood. And I remember people surrounding my grandmother with love. And what I realized looking back on this years later is I didn't remember people talking about the killer. I did remember that when a man was apprehended and accused and brought to trial and found guilty, that our family was relieved. And I remembered that it was extremely difficult for my grandmother, who had to go to court to be a witness. But I remember what a relief it was when she didn't have to do that more than once. And I didn't really think about it that much again, perhaps until 2010, when a lovely young woman named Molly Hawthorne McDougall was murdered in her home in Henniker, New Hampshire. And I had probably met Molly once when she was this big, because I knew her mom Margaret Hawthorne. And I remember, and I went to the memorial service, and at the memorial service, Margaret got up and said, "We will not succumb to fear, and we will not let this turn us toward a desire for revenge. That we are people who believe in love, and we are not going to let the loss of Molly take that away from us. We are not going to allow the killer to turn us into something that we are not." And I talked to Margaret after the service, and I told her a little bit about my grandfather. And I thought about the fact that what was it that enabled me, after going through a traumatic experience like that when I was only 11, to turn into a flaming peace activist and a guy who supported abolishing the death penalty and supports civil rights and human rights, and that had my family reacted in a different way, had my family gone down the path of desiring revenge, I'm sure that that would have had what I would now see as a poisoning effect on me in my formation. And that the choice my family took for whatever reason is one that enabled me to become a person who would end up being a leader of the movement to abolish the death penalty in New Hampshire, which I'm proud to be part of right now. So last Thursday, there I was in the gallery of the House with Margaret Hawthorne, and Rennie Cushing got up. He's now still a state representative. He's now the chair of the Criminal Justice and Public Safety Committee. His hair is way grayer than it was back then. And he talked about John Newton. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. That people can change their minds, that people can turn their lives around. And he talked about his daughter, Amazing Grace, who just the previous week had graduated from college. And he talked about his father and how we should not allow killers to take away our values, even if they take away our loved ones. And that if we believe in respecting life and we believe in respecting others, then we've got to apply that across the board. And by a single vote, the governor's veto of the death penalty repeal bill was overturned. And as Pat says, on Thursday this week, it will come up in the Senate. And if 16 senators vote in favor of repeal, New Hampshire will be done with the death penalty. So maybe that's where the story ends, but maybe not. Because as I thought about it, and I thought about how do you sustain a campaign like that? If for me, it started in 1985. How do you keep that going? I think about the people like Rennie Cushing or Cliff Below or other people who are part of this struggle, Barbara Keshen and Marty Hunt and all these other folks. I think about the other people who've talked about their families. I think about Carol talking about her father being murdered in his furniture store. And I think about Anne, whose husband was killed in a drive-by shooting where she was shot at as well. And I think of Bess, whose mom was raped and murdered when she was a little girl, and they never caught the person who did it. And Bess is part of the movement to abolish the death penalty. And I think of all these people. I think of John Breckenridge, who was the police partner of Michael Briggs, the officer who was murdered in Manchester in 2006. And John Breckenridge, after this took place, thought about his own religious upbringing and his values and decided that he was going to support doing away with the death penalty. And I think about all of these things that have changed over this time. And I realize that for anybody to sustain a campaign like this, it's not just about that particular victory. It's about something. It's always about something that's bigger. And I think about Dr. King, who borrowed words from a 19th century Unitarian theologian. And at the end of the march from Selma to Montgomery, he said, "How long will it take? Not long, because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." So where we are right now, where we hope to be on Thursday, is not at the end, but we are at a point on that arc of the moral universe, and it is bending towards justice. And we can all be part of making that bend take place. Thanks.
Thank you, Arnie. Maybe some people in the Senate will listen to this story and be rationally influenced. That'd be a beautiful thing.